Josh Hammer over at the American Spectator has an article out there calling the Democrats the new Confederacy. It says here, the rise of the new Confederacy, Democrat insurrectionists have a poor track record. Now, I find this to be a real scream because whenever the Republicans are in power and they do something the Democrats don't like, the Democrats will call them neo-Confederate. Likewise, when the Democrats are in power and Republicans don't like something that the Democrats do, the Republicans are going to call the Democrats neo-Confederate, and we're seeing that now. Are sanctuary cities constitutional? That's the question here. Well, technically, yes, because while states cannot block the federal government, federal agents from coming in and rounding up these illegal immigrants, legal aliens, these states are under no obligation, according to the Constitution, to assist federal agents in rounding up those illegal aliens. They just can't block them from going in there or obstruct these agents from carrying out their duties, federal duties, to round these people up. I know it sounds weird, but that's just how it is. And I said this before, I'll say it again. I think the best way to handle this would be to call a constitutional convention, pardon me, call a constitutional convention, and talk about things like immigration, trade, reeling in some of these powers that we've given to the federal government that have resulted in bloated bureaucracy, inefficiency. The problem is we got people who are too damn lazy to do so because they're comfortable with Social Security, all the money they get in these states. They love getting that federal money, those federal dollars. When states, because the CSA actually had this right, the states should be self-sufficient. The post office and the Confederacy had to support itself. States had to be responsible for their own infrastructure. You didn't have these, or money coming out of the Treasury from Congress to fund these internal improvements, except for things that were necessary, like maintaining the coast, roads, that sort of thing. Normal infrastructure that has to be maintained. But these special interest group projects or public works projects, no. The Confederacy didn't go for that. The Confederacy didn't go for that. So at any rate, let's get to this. And thank you again for being with me. If you're new, by the way, I have to say this in every video because I don't want you walking away just because you see a still shot. So that's the way I do the channel. I find it's the best way to do the channel. It's you, me, my smartphone, my voice. We talk about the news of the day. Anything goes. I originally started this to preserve great music, art, history. But it's kind of evolved because we don't live in a bubble into including more news topics. We do an Oddly Friday news segment. So that's what the channel's about. But thank you again for watching and subscribing if you've been with me for a while. And thank you to everybody who commented and viewed my short that I just posted. My previous short. I just posted a short about this video here, my preview short to this video here. That's a mouthful. But thank you for watching that video, talking about how Tim Walz is being compared to Jefferson Davis. And a lot of people are making that argument about Minnesota in general. Minnesota is Jefferson Davis. It's a Confederacy. These Democrats, what these Democrats are doing, it's a Confederacy. Is that true? So I want to share with you as well in this video some quotes by George Washington, James Madison, John C. Calhoun. You said the deadly word, Calhoun. John C. Calhoun had a lot of good things to say about government, and he served several years in government. He was our vice president. He was secretary of war or something. But he served several years in the government. So he knew how government should work, how it should function. And yes, I know you're going to tell me in the comment section that, he favored slavery. Well, guess what? In those days, people also had their views on workhouses in England and on indentured servitude because they thought it was the best thing for these people who were on the lower part of the economic ladder, so to speak, because that's what they knew at the time. They didn't know any better. That's the world that they knew. People didn't go in and work 9 to 5 necessarily. That really didn't happen until the latter part of the 19th century. And even then, you still didn't have this thing called corporations yet. So, kind of a gray area. You had companies, but you didn't have things like corporations yet. And you didn't have a lot of child labor laws. I've talked about that before. So one of the things we do on this channel is try to correct the record. And I would be at a loss if I didn't do that for my audience. I mean, that's my responsibility as a YouTuber, is to bring you the most accurate information possible. Now, of course, I'm going to have my different viewpoints on things just like you do. Okay, but I try to be as open-minded as I can. But thank you again for watching that video. As I was saying, I think last time I checked was like over 500 views. And I was surprised to get that many views that quickly. I mean, I've been sitting out here on YouTube, just, feels like I've been blown in the wind. So at any rate, not to ramble on here, let's just get to the topic at hand. But again, thank you for watching and subscribing and being a part of this thing called the Culture Confederacy. I like the name of the channel. I think it's got a nice ring to it. So again, this is by Josh Hammer. And he's got a picture here of Attorney General Keith Ellison at the No Kings protest in 2025. Remember the No Kings protest? Trump is a king. He's acting like a king. We don't want any kings. But you loved it when we elected Barack Obama. You loved it when we elected Bill Clinton. You loved it when we elected Ronald Reagan, because you had a lot of Democrats that left the Democrat Party back then in the early 80s to join the Republicans. They voted for Reagan. It said that John Lennon kind of favored Reagan. He liked Reagan's policies. And it's always been said about Reagan, then Reagan took up the mantle from JFK. And if you, look back at the record of it, JFK was anti-abortion. He was pro-American, anti-communist. So really, the Democrats of the early 1960s are today's Republicans. It's a weird switch, if you will. But it's just happened and evolved over time. As I like to say, yesterday's liberals are today's conservatives, and that's true. I mean, things happen, life changes, society changes. So let's get to this. Now, he starts out by quoting King Solomon from the Bible. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. The book of Ecclesiastes. True words have never been written. Look no further than the present anarchic tumult in Minnesota. Don't you love how they write all these fancy words? They just can't say something in plain language. You don't have to worry about that here. I don't try to prove that I'm something that I'm not. I am what I am. The channel is what it is. And there you go. Pardon me again. So on January 12th, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison initiated a lawsuit on behalf of the North Star State, along with municipal co-plaintiffs, Minneapolis and St. Paul, against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE Acting Director Todd Lyons, and the rest of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement apparatus. In his press conference, pardon me again, my throat's getting me fits here. In this press conference announcing the suit, Ellison emphasized the same basic arguments as his formal complaint, namely that ICE's enforcement surge in Minnesota, or Minneapolis, amounts to a violation of the 10th Amendment and the sovereign laws and powers granted to the states. Now, it's funny, they have a chart here. Your political profile. Are you a leftist? Are you a rightist? Are you left? Are you on the left? Are you on the right? Are you centrist? Are you libertarian? I just consider myself a common sense guy. I use logic and reason to figure everything out. And I think part of the problem we have here is this idea of party. George Washington warned against having these political factions or parties. Now, I understand that in later years, these people in the founding generation, they became part of this party system. But there's nothing in the Constitution that requires political parties. We should get rid of them. And that's really the main angst, or that's what's driving the angst here, is the idea of right versus left when it should be a common sense issue. And we should be looking at the Constitution and making sure that the federal government is not infringing on the rights of the states. Because even though the states gave up some of their sovereignty, some of their power when they signed on the Constitution, they did not give up total sovereignty. And that's important to remember that. So it goes on to say here, in essence, Ellison and his Minnesota Democratic Party leadership conferees argue that the constitutional federalism articulated in the 10th Amendment and its corollary of states' rights can shield the land of 10,000 lakes from the long enforcement of the law, of federal immigration law. Ellison and Minnesota Democrats claim that by declaring their state and cities to be illegal alien sanctuaries, they can nullify federal immigration law. And stop me if you've heard this one before. Now, he's got a little article in here you can go to. Minnesota and the new nullification crisis. Democrats in America have a long and inglorious history of invoking states' rights and shirking federal law. It has never ended well. Well, why was that? Why hasn't it ended well? Maybe because people like Abraham Lincoln didn't want to accept the fact that states wanted to leave the Union. This whole idea that the South leaving the United States or leaving the Union destroyed the Union, well, the Union still existed just with fewer states when they seceded. So you still had a Union, you just didn't have South Carolina or whatever the state was that seceded in 1860, 1861, or states. In 1798 and 1799, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, members of the Democratic-Republican Party, the partisan predecessor to today's Democrat Party, albeit with some changes, penned the... By the way, guess who was talking about secession back in, 1794, 1815? It was Northerners. It wasn't Southerners. William Lloyd Garrison, in his paper, The Liberator, was calling for a union without slaveholders. We'll just secede, and they can go their separate way. So really, they didn't care one way or the other about slavery. They just didn't want to deal with living next to slave owners. They could care less about that. They may have had their views on it, but you have a lot of people that are still racist back then. So, people are weird, man. They're just weird, okay? People have different perspectives on a certain issue, and they go to a certain point on that issue, and then they draw back, So, give them the time, the culture. So they're part of the Democratic-Republican Party, partisan predecessor to today's Democrat Party, penning the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. The resolutions, a direct response to the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts, can't even talk tonight, championed by President John Adams, argued that when Congress passes an unconstitutional statute, a lot of read here, the states are permitted to declare the law null and void within their own jurisdictions. According to this argument, if a state's constitutional officers deem a federal law to be unconstitutional, the supremacy clause of Article 4 of the Constitution, of Article 6 of the Constitution, which normally establishes federal law as, quote-unquote, the supreme law of the land over state law, simply does not apply. Well, yes, Josh Hammer, because we have something called the 10th Amendment. And we have this idea of nullification for a reason. Because the states created the federal government to work as their agent. As he mentions here, actually, in this article. He makes that argument. But he's so blinded by this idea of Republican Democrat that he can't see it. That the federal government is all-knowing, all-seeing, that they have all the answers. He's forgetting the 10th Amendment. He's forgetting Article 1, Section 9 and 10 of the Constitution. And Section 8, which talks about all the powers granted to Congress. Well, who's granted those powers? The people of the states who created the federal government via convention. So you're getting the correct history here. It wasn't the federal government that came first, it was the states. The states came first. And we have that 10th Amendment as a safety valve so the federal government doesn't encroach on the rights of the states. Otherwise, we have a monarchy. Otherwise, the federal government can do whatever the hell it wants. Again, just because the states signed on to the Constitution doesn't mean they gave up their sovereignty entirely. So yes, there are instances where states are going to have to step in and say, you can't do that, that's unconstitutional. You're violating the rights of the states. This sentiment was taken to its logical conclusion during the antebellum period. During the nullification crisis of 1832-1833, South Carolina passed the Ordinance of Nullification, declaring the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 to be unconstitutional and unenforceable in the Palmetto State. South Carolina even took initial steps to organize a militia in anticipation of attempted federal mobilization. That's true. In ensuing decades, South Carolinian John C. Calhoun emerged as the most passionate advocate for state nullification. So let's go to his disquisition on government, John C. Calhoun. I'm just going to read you a paragraph or two of this. You can go find this. Let me find the site here. We can just look up disquisition on government, and there's different sites that have it. You can look at the text. It'll pull up a PDF. Click on the PDF. But I believe this is paragraph 25. So let's get to this. He's talking about the purpose of government, why it's formed, why you need the states, why you have, how important it is to have the government set up the way that's been set up in the United States so we don't have a monarchy. How government then must be construed, I told you I can't talk tonight. Pardon me again. How government then must be constructed, there you go, in order to counteract through its organism this tendency on the part of those who make and execute the laws to oppress those subject to their operation is the next question which claims attention. Question or questions. There is but one way in which this can possibly be done, and that is by such an organism as will furnish the rule with means of resisting successfully this tendency on the part of the rulers to oppress and abuse. Power can only be resisted by power, and tendency by tendency. Those who exercise power and those who subject to its exercise, the rulers and the ruled, stand in antagonistic relations to each other. The same constitution of our nature, which is ordained, the same constitution of our nature, which leads rulers to oppress the ruled, regardless of the object for which government is ordained, will with equal strength lead the ruled to resist when possessed of the means of making peaceable and effective resistance. So we have to have some type of check in place to make sure the federal government is not abusing its power, that it's not acting like a monarch. But if you go to George Washington's farewell address, it talks about remaining united. The name of American, which belongs to you and your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. You are an American. It's a distinction, a distinct culture. And your national capacity. Well, the word nation back then meant something different than what we're used to now. For a lot of people, their backyard was their nation. When he's saying nation, he's meaning the identity of being an American. We have a unique culture that is American. It's not European, it's American. Uphold the Constitution. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government, but the Constitution, which at any time exists until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. So this backs up, what John C. Calhoun is saying here. That you have this thing called the Constitution. You have a federal government. You have government in place. And you have to have checks and balances here. and that anybody who signs on to this Constitution agrees that they're not going to infringe on the rights of other states, that the federal government is not going to infringe on the rights or on individual liberties of the people who reside in these states or in this thing called the United States. Finally, beware of political parties. They are likely, in the course of time and things, to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. So it's time we get rid of these political parties. They're not in the Constitution. We don't need them. We do not need political parties. You get rid of these political parties, I can guarantee you, you're not going to have an issue with immigration, because these parties aren't going to have any power. They're not going to have any clout. And the people of the states can decide what's best for their state, not what's best for a political party. So this is somewhat of a lengthy article. Just for the sake of time, I'll just move along here. For nearly a century, I keep saying pardon me, but I'm doing this in one take. It is what it is. For nearly a century after the Civil War, Calhoun's ghost lingered. There's a ghost of Calhoun out there. Beware the ghost of John C. Calhoun. As the civil rights movement gained steam, segregationists invoked nullification and states' rights as justifications for defined federally mandated civil rights. Well, yes, that's true. Why did they do that? Is it because they were racist? Now, I'm sure you had racists in the South. You also had racists in the North. I mean, if you look at Boston, for example, they were having busing riots in 1974. So who's the guilty party here, the North or the South? The argument was, you can't force us to do X, Y, or Z when it's not in the Constitution. This is an issue that we as a state can take care of. You may not like the way that we're handling this, but we are a state and we have the right to take care of this any way we choose. The Southern Manifesto, signed by dozens of U.S. senators and congressmen in 1956, took the position that the 10th Amendment permitted states to defy the Supreme Court's Brown versus Board of Education desegregation decision of 1954. You know about that. I'm not going to read it to you. And echoing the discredited theories of yesteryear, Ellison, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and Representative Ilhan Omar, and the rest of the state's top Democratic brass have emerged as modern reincarnations of Jefferson Davis and George Wallace. Jefferson Davis and George Wallace. Well, guess what? Jefferson Davis became president of the Confederacy after these states seceded and formed this thing called the Confederacy. So how could Governor Tim Walz, who's in a state that's still in the Union, be equivalent to Jefferson Davis? You see the logic here? This guy doesn't even know his own history or the timeline of how things actually happened. They wouldn't see it that way naturally, nor would Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson recognize that her own race-infused worldview and belief in racial determination or determinism. I tell you, there's a lot to read here tonight, so thanks for bearing with me. As Justice Clarence Thomas accused her of harboring in his Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard 2023 concurrence. On Thursday, Trump Board Czar Tom Homan announced that the administration is prepared to draw down federal personnel in Minnesota if the state cooperates. See, Trump is caving. I'll tell you why he's caving, because he didn't bother alerting the governor of Minnesota or the mayor of Minneapolis. We're sending these people in to round these people. We're sending our agents in to round these people up. Just like you did in California. We're just going to come here and we're going to do it. Well, you really can't do that. You need to notify the governor of the state that that's whatever the state is, that that's what you're doing. Or the mayor of the city. And why is he choosing Minneapolis and not some other city? Historically, Democratic Party subversives, or subversives, there we go, and insurrectionists have not been known for their cooperation with the feds. The good news for President Donald Trump is that he has a clear legal precedent for how to respond. Subversives and insurrectionists have not been known for their cooperation with the feds. Well, I hate to break the news to Josh Hammer, but these states that seceded, they were not insurrectionists because they seceded. If you know the difference between the word secession and insurrection, you have no business working in media or working in the government. Sorry. You should know the difference. The good news for President Donald Trump is he has a clear legal precedent for how to respond if the neo-Confederate uprising in Minnesota continues apace. Apace. On April 15, 1861, in response to the attack on Fort Sumter 3 days prior, President Abraham Lincoln invoked the Insurrection Act of 1807. Trump has recently been musing about doing the same. Trump pulled the trigger. Maybe, after all, there's nothing new under the sun. Well, what was going on in 1860 is a far cry from what's happening now with illegal immigration. And guess who's responsible for this idea of nationalism? For creating all this bloated bureaucracy or allowing the floodgates to open up for bloated bureaucracy. It's Abraham Lincoln. Plain and simple. Abraham Lincoln. All Abraham Lincoln had to do was say, we're just going to let the South go. Let them do what they want. We'll just let them go. That's all he had to do. That's all Abraham Lincoln had to do. And eventually, I'm pretty sure that slavery would have died off. But the funny thing is, if you go to check the record on here, seriously, if you go and check the record about this, you're going to find that in D.C., it was still in 1860, 1861, I believe, legal to own slaves in D.C. You had slaves living in D.C. in 1860, 1861, on the eve of the Civil War. So Josh Hammer really needs to go back and check his history here. And I'm sorry, but no, Tim Walz is not Jefferson Davis. These Democrats are not the new Confederacy. They're a political party, a political entity. And it's time we get rid of these political parties because they've done a lot of damage to this thing called the United States. So I thought I'd share this with you. And I just want to end with one quote here, one quote by James Madison. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So tell me what you think in the comment section below. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Follow me at Instagram, Jason197711. You can also go to Substack or find me at Culture Confederacy at CultureConfed1 on X. So God bless, take care, keep up the culture, and I'll catch you next time.